Welcome to episode 45 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. In this episode's main segment, I'm interviewing Julian Gilbey. Julian is a British writer and director. In the interview, Julian gives a detailed account of how he broke into the industry, and we talk about his latest film, Plastic. So stay tuned for that. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast. Any websites or links that I mentioned in the podcast can be found on the blog and the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcasts, and then just look for episode number 45. If you want my free guide, How to Sell Your Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide, how to write a professional logline inquiry letter, how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. It really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'll be talking with writer-director Julian Gilbey. Here is the interview. Welcome, Julian, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
So to start out, I wonder if you can give us a quick overview of your career in the entertainment industry, kind of how you got to where you are today.
Gosh, it's an interesting one. You know, I left film school, university in 1998, and 97. Jesus Christ, sounding old. And basically spent 4 or 5 years making a clockwork 16mm film, which it opened a few doors, sort of halfway and stuff. But ultimately, unlike America, it's a real kind of cottage industry over here in some respects. And basically, what it really came down to was that after a while, and after working on a few other people's ideas, I realized that I wanted to write my own original ideas. So with our other screenplays, we adapted other people's screenplays with the likes of Rolling with the Nines or Rise of the Foot Soldier, which was adapted from a true book. But I suppose my most satisfying work to date was, and what I'm doing more of, which was A Lonely Place to Die, which was just a nice, solid idea from me and my younger brother, and we went straight with it. And Plastic, again, it was an adaptation from somebody else's screenplay, which was, successful in some areas, but perhaps not quite as satisfying an experience as A Lonely Place to Die. Moving forward, yes, I have several projects moving forward that are all original pieces of work.
Okay, so now when you said these 16mm films, are you talking about was one of those films Reckoning Day? Was that a 16mm film?
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah. I mean that was a shot mute. I mean we literally had to shoot guideline sound. That was shot on clockwork Bolexes that could only take 100-foot rolls of film, and it was crazy, but I mean, we were out of film school and we just went ahead and did it, and it was a lot of incredibly time-consuming but mostly fun experience,
Yeah. So let's just take me back to, there's got to be some moment, I mean, where you, and it sounds to me like Reckoning Day, you said it opened a few doors. What sort of happened? Like, what did you do with Reckoning Day? How did you get that second job, or even how did you get?
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, basically, I just didn't know. I was so green. This was back in sort of 2001 or whatever. I just made a load of VHS tapes and sent them out to all these different addresses and all these different sales agents and companies, and I just didn't know. So a lot of them just came back unopened that simply said, we don't read unsolicited material, etc., etc. But luckily, we'd done this movie, and then luckily we had a couple of sales agents that came back and said, yeah, we can do some sales for this, and that, and then of course sales agents are in touch with other production companies, and then they put other people in touch with other people, and then you start doing the whole network thing, and that's sort of how it began, like that.
So Rolling with the Nines, that was like your first paid gig where someone hired you to write and direct something?
I'd love to say, yeah, God, yeah, I could have retired on the amount I was paid for that. No, that was an interesting project. Again, it was somebody else's sort of idea, but it was a film that could be financed, and it was an idea that we researched and ran with, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. It opened our eyes to an interesting world, and it's not an entirely unsuccessful project. I got the Carl Foreman Award, the BAFTA nomination for most promising upcoming star, which was won by Andrea Arnold, who did Red Road. But I think she deserved it, to be fair. Rolling with the Nines, it was a really, it was with these lower budgets, we were really cutting our teeth and really just learning so much,
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that people get a sort of a scope. I mean, everybody looks at these big, like the guy that just did Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's like, wow, this is a massive hit. But they don't realize that, he started out exactly like what you're talking about with these Reckoning Day, rolling with these very low budget films, and slowly worked his way up. So take us through, when's the process where, Plastic, I don't know what the budget was, but it's a big polished movie. So fill us in on some of the details of where you went from, doing these really low budget films to actually getting paid and working with stars.
Okay, sure. Well, what happened was, after Rolling with the Nines, we'd actually written a script before that based on this book called Rise of the Foot Soldier, which was about a sort of an ex-football hooligan who became a gangland member, and ultimately his friends were murdered in a horrendous triple murder in December 1995. And then what happened was that we went to this production company, and Rolling with the Nines, they watched that, and they realized that we, had a competent filmmaking ability, and it was a very hard-hitting script. It was also a very violent script, and they took a chance on us, and I've had a great relationship with Carnaby sort of ever since. And Rise of the Foot Soldier was, although not a big theatrical hit, it was an enormous home cinema hit. To God say, that film sold over 1 million DVDs in the UK alone. It became massive, and it's, again, I wouldn't sit here and just sort of tell you it's a perfect film. I would say that my sort of most satisfactory film, purely on a filmmaking level, came next, which was A Lonely Place to Die, and that for me was the fun of that. It was just a purely original idea of mine and my brothers, and it was really fun to just completely sit down and not be a slave to true stories and all the rest of it, and not have to sit there meeting people that had lived the life, because I think we got a bit true storied out, Mm-hmm. So with A Lonely Place to Die, it was nice to just be able to have that freedom to just write, exactly what we wanted to do.
Yeah. So what was the budget on something like Rise of the Foot Soldier?
Rise of the Foot Soldier is about $1.3 million.
Okay, so it's definitely not nothing. And you got that job. It was really based on the strength.
That was based on Rolling with the Nines, based on all of that. But when I say 1.3 million, I mean 1.3 million pounds. So that's what, about $2 million, maybe?
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So yeah, that definitely fills in some of those details. So let's talk a bit about Plastic, your most recent film. Maybe you can just kind of give us some background about how that story came about and how you got involved with that project.
Again, it was from one of the producers, one of the exec producers, I should say, from Rise of the Foot Soldier, and he'd seen A Lonely Place to Die, really liked it, knew I was working on a number of other projects, and said, look, I've got this movie. It had already been written, and he said, well, I've got this movie. I want it to go as soon as possible. And, I read the screenplay, and it needed a lot of work. And Plastic, it's a tough one, because it's somebody else's story, and it's also loosely based on a true story. And, so William and I, my brother and I, we went in, and, it needed a lot of work. Which was a tough one, but you're always, I guess, we took the bull by the horns and thought, well, this should be, it should be a fun adventure. It was a much lighter sort of film of touch than say A Lonely Place to Die. But by comparison, it's definitely a lighter toned film, even though it does have some darker moments. But it's interesting. Some of the UK critics, they got very angry about, the morals behind credit card frauds and credit card fraud and everything else, and the supposed glamour of it all. And we were like, well, we do need to sort of seduce our audience in, but, you know, and I'm not making excuses or anything here for the character's behavior, but we were bringing in, we were bringing in the credit crunch, and we were bringing in the dialogues of how, a lot of, students from university have had, a lot of people, we only wanted to touch on it because we didn't want to get preachy. I mean, it's a fun film after all. But we did want to touch on the fact that there's a generation out there that a lot of them are not going to be able to do what they want to do in life because a bunch of fuckheads in America and the UK and Europe and everything else just snorted up their future in cocaine binge nightmares up in Sipping the City, and it's true, and so we were at least throwing that out as one, not an excuse, just one more explanation as to why people might turn to another form of fraud, another form of making money,
So I'm curious in terms of this. Okay, so you have a screenplay that you've been given. Did you then go back, and it's, as you said, loosely based on a true story. Did you then go back and sort of dig into the true story, look at the screenplay, and then how did you sort of meld the two?
Yeah, we had to take a lot of stuff out. I think also the most important thing is to go back and talk to the original people. I would have liked. It's an interesting one because I think it was definitely a difficult screenplay to tonally get right. Plastic. It was, initially I think the characters were far darker. How I guess they may or may not have been in real life, but I kind of felt we've got to try and sort of humanize it more. But it was a tough one. It was a tough one because. It's a fine balance, and something like A Lonely Place to Die, it's very easy to set the tone. The tone is a bunch of people saving a child and trying desperately to survive. But this film had to balance, a more harder tonal line between comedy, between seriousness, between morals, between ethics, between excitement, between it was a tough one, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, so coming through this experience, I totally agree. It is much tougher. Do you have any tips for writers that are maybe potentially going to try and tackle some material that has these tough issues?
I would. It's interesting because somewhere the other day, it's funny because one of the screenplays I'm writing at the moment is I'm definitely sort of, I've got several movies at the moment, but one of the screenplays at the moment I'm enjoying writing a lot of is called Summer of Life and Death, and it's about a couple of gap year students who have a crazy summer out in Chamonix, sex, drugs, rock and roll, and extreme mountaineering, and all the rest of it, and it's a really interesting, fascinating film to write, but it's interesting. I'm drawing on a lot of my own parallels, my own sort of time, and ski seasons, my own time being a student, my own experiences with mountaineering. I've climbed the Eiger, the Matterhorn, Mont Blanc, a few other bits and pieces, and I really, the point I'm trying to sort of talk about here is that writing from truth has been a really, really interesting, fun experience for that particular project. I think, with certain other films, if you're dealing with sort of crime, for example, you always have that filter in that, you're not a criminal yourself. Yes, you can go and talk to these people, but it has been a really refreshing experience writing this new screenplay, which I think is going to be very successful as a film. I think it's a really successful mix. It's just, I keep going back to that thing of truth or trying to find truth within it, the best that you can, because I think otherwise it can come across, as false. And sometimes with plastic, it's hard. And then at the moment where you find the truth is you go, well, okay, I may not have done this, I may not have done that, but I have been drunk at a party, I have had sexual jealousy, I have had this, I have had that. So try and always, even if you've got a story that doesn't really have anything that you can relate to, you can start throwing in those human moments. Do you know what I mean? I know I'm very long-winded way around your question, but you really...
No, absolutely. I totally get that.
We've all had sex, we've all had a drunken argument, we've all done this, we've all done that, we've all done all sorts of things that we can actually, draw on our experiences, and that is how people will ultimately empathize with the characters,
Yeah, for sure. So just take us through the process. I mean, I think people are always just wondering, like, how did you land this gig? Just give us some sort of logistics of, how exactly you got hired. I mean, who hired you, and what the production sort of looks like, and just as getting you on as writer and director.
Well, I mean, with Plastic, it was a case of I was invited up to London for a bite of lunch, and I had the script put in front of me. As a producer, I already knew, and he said, "Look, Julian, we want you to do this. Go away and read it and tell us what you think." And I said, "Okay, guys, it needs some work. And they were like, "Yeah, well, will you come on board and do it?" And I thought, you know what, this will be fun. It should be, again, after doing the much sort of darker, hard-hitting, Lonely Place to Die, where a bunch of mountaineers rescue a child who's buried alive, up in the mountains, and you've got sort of, this terrifying sort of kidnap plot unfolding. It was nice to just do something that was a little lighter of tone, not to knock it off and say it's not serious in places, but it was nice to have a bit of for our characters to have a bit more fun.
Yeah. So just to back it up a little bit, so the producer that you had this initial meeting with, that was a producer you had worked with before on Lonely Place to Die?
No, on Rise of the Foot Soldier. One of the producers on that. Yeah.
Okay. So you've just kept in touch with these various producers
absolutely.
you've worked with.
Yeah, I'm always in touch. I mean, I'm always in touch. I mean, I've got a build. I mean, I'm just day after tomorrow, I've got a meeting with Ridley Scott's company over here, Scott Free Productions. I'm just going in. I don't know what the meeting's about. They want to see me to discuss a couple of projects. So that'll be fun. That'll be interesting. We'll see how that goes. Just to take every meeting, and that's based entirely on Lonely Place to Die. So it's once you've done a movie that has got well reviewed and has got out there, then you can definitely start opening a lot of doors. But it is tough to get the bloody thing in the first place. So that I really do sympathise.
So one of the things I like to do on the podcast is give people sort of an idea of the scope. I mean, you went to the meeting, you got this job, basically writing and directing this script, and the entertainment industry is filled with projects that are basically a false start. How many of these types of meetings do you typically take, and then I've had
plenty of false starts, and and I've had a lot of meetings, where they're very, very promising. But a lot of these meetings, a lot of these false starts, they usually come when people don't have a screenplay, and they talk about the amount of times I hear about films in development hell, and it's usually because it's either a first draft screenplay or it's still an idea, or it's still a 3-page concept, and you start thinking over breakfast, Jesus Christ, is that all? Everybody's getting, everyone's getting up and everyone's making all these plans over an outline that, and that is typically when something's potentially a non-starter, where things tend to move quicker, as if you've got a good spec script, or you've got a good, a screenplay, you've got 95 pages or 105 pages, whatever, that are very strong. That's not to say that it doesn't necessarily need a tweak, but and that's why I have 2 spec scripts at the moment, and a third which is half done, but which basically it gets the wheels moving much quicker if you have a finished screenplay that's of a high quality, because people can go, right, let's see where we can go with this. As opposed
I guess
to,
my main
if you've got a weak screenplay, or if you've got an unfinished screenplay, or the worst thing to do that I would say to your writers is when they say, well, it's kind of half finished and I need a few pointers, and I don't, do you know what? Show it to your friends, show it to other writers, get advice, get everything, but don't go to work, because you only get one chance to present that script to an agent. You only get one chance to present that script to any particular producer, and you've got to get it so when, we're talking about a first draft, for example, if I go back to this story that I'm writing at the moment, Summer of Life and Death, I'm looking at my printed out draft 0.5 here. So what I start with is a scratch draft. That was 173 pages. That was every idea, everything. That's what I call my scratch draft. Then I do draft 0.5. Then I do draft 0.75. And then after that, I do what I call a first draft. And that is something that I think, this is something I think I could show. And that is not what I call the shooting script. But when people say, oh, it's only a first draft, so, at the moment there's no chemistry between Julie and John, but we'll draft. No. Get it as if it was something that you would present, as if you bind it as a book. Because, it might be your 10th draft, but it's a first draft to anyone you're showing it to. But I do think sometimes people too quickly, call their first draft. So, I mean, I've been working for 4 months on this project. I'm working with a couple of producers on it, but I'm still not showing it to them. And I say, guys, I'm not showing you my 136-page draft 0.5. You'll be seeing the first draft when it's about 115 pages, which will still be a little long and all the rest of it, but it should feel exactly what we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make any sense to you? I know I'm being
absolutely. No, that's a great tip. I totally agree. So let's talk a little.
Just to say, if you want those meetings, you want those film projects to get off the ground. Actually, another thing just to talk about it is, I was talking to Aaron Creevy. He's a lovely chap who did Welcome to the Punch, and he's directing Autobahn at the moment with Joel Silver. And I was chatting to him, and he was just talking to me, and he said, he did a lot of what you talk about, go to these gigs, go to these meetings where you talk to people, and for one reason or another, nothing happens, or somebody else gets the gig. And eventually he said, you know what, I can write. I'm just going to write the gig, and then I'm attached to that. And then, hooray, and then, I'm attached to it. I mean, I suppose it's the Sylvester Stallone story there, isn't it? I mean, he was a bit part thug in Woody Allen movies. If Rocky had been written by somebody else, they'd be offering it to Robert Redford, not, a bit part mugger from a Woody Allen movie. But he wrote it, he attached himself to it. So in that respect, there's also that approach.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my main point to sort of asking questions like that is I think especially new people that are getting into the industry, I think they would look at your career and think that you're basically on easy street, and they don't realize how much hustling is involved.
Oh, my God. No, not easy street at all. I mean, definitely not. I think, A Lonely Place to Die is my film that, that's the one that's won the most awards, got the most kudos at American festivals, worldwide festivals. That's a film I'm very, very proud of. Plastic is a broader film. It's lighter of touch. It's one could call it more fun. Does that make it a better film than A Lonely Place to Die? No, probably not. But it's it's a good piece of escapism. But having said that, but now my next couple of films are sort of definitely going on the sort of the harder hitting sort of side of things,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's talk about your collaboration with your brother. A lot of the scripts that you've written and directed have been co-written with your brother. Maybe you can kind of just tell us what that process looks like. I know there's a lot of writers out there that they collaborate with friends, family. So maybe you can just kind of enlighten us.
I suppose if you're going to collaborate with someone, you need to write with someone that you can be totally honest with, and tell somebody when something's good, tell somebody when something's bad, and also hopefully you trust their opinion. But you don't, what I tend to do, I don't know if this is what, most people do, but if I've come up with a story, the way I write, is that, William and I will sit around, if we're coming up with a story, we'll sit around the table for 2 days, 2.5 days, 3 days, and thrash it out. We'll thrash out a story, which we'll put down over, I don't know, maybe 10 pages and call it a treatment, And then, then we'll just do a more detailed treatment, which is, instead of, you write detailed treatments would be Julie goes to see John to discuss the affair. Nothing comes of it. That's that scene. Tick. Then you go to so you start the shape, and then of course, and then ultimately you have to do the draft and write it. But I like to have a sort of an outline, if you like, a sort of a 10-page outline of the screenplay. And then what will happen is William and I usually go, if there's a double, sort of like with A Lonely Place to Die, it's like, right, well, I'll take these two characters that are following down this route. Why don't you work on this story for a little bit? And then we'll go over one another's work and work on it together and blah, blah, blah. But we go off, then come back to one another. And, it feels very organic.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about filmmaking, just sort of in general in the UK. You've given us sort of some great general tips. I mentioned to you this in the pre-interview. I get a lot of questions from people from the UK that say, how can I break in? I'm not from the UK, so I don't really know. But I wonder if you have some tips for people in the UK, young writers, maybe they want to direct. How can they potentially get their stuff out there and try and break in?
Yeah, I would say, honestly, my advice, I wish I'd done it a few years ago now. Now that I've just, is for them to write their best spec script and get it to a really good agency. And maybe in the meantime, instead of doing a really low-budget feature film, is to spend, instead of say, because some people can go and do a feature film for 10 grand, and, for every one that's good, there's 100 that aren't good. And so maybe instead of shooting a feature film for 10 grand or whatever, whatever you can rustle up, beg, borrow, steal, even if it's 5 grand or it's less, or if it's $1 grand, instead do a much slicker short film And I think, do a much slicker short film. What would be even more interesting is if you, for example, you write your spec script to the best ability that you can, and then maybe choose a couple of scenes from that spec script and shoot them to the highest sort of, to a very high value. I mean, that's what the guy who did Saw, he wrote the screenplay to Saw, and he spent 10 grand shooting 5 minutes of it. And he said, literally, I'll just shoot it and it'll look, for that amount of money, I can do the lighting, I can show people what it's like, and people watch it and go, whoa, this is slick, and they go, yep, well, there's the script, bang. And that's a very good idea of doing it, and that's something that I will do and continue to do, which is to shoot a sort of a mini, slick, sort of 5-minute short film / trailer to the screenplay that you're handing in.
Yeah. So, that's interesting, and I'm surprised, I guess, a little bit, because that was not the route that you took. You did the Reckoning Day, where you did exactly what you said. You shot the feature for very low budget.
But I mean that was straight out of university, and that was also 14 years ago. That was also. Let me think about it. That was also. It didn't open. It just creaked a couple of doors open because I got it out to a sales agent. But now, instead of, just because I kind of wanted to make an action movie, flex my muscles, it would have been more sensible to have perhaps done a couple of shorts. Because what I kept finding as well is I kept trying to improve it and patch up the early stuff we'd shot, because we now had this, and it was difficult. It's difficult. It's not a route I would sort of do unless you had a very, very sort of strong script. I mean, I'm not talking, say, maybe 2-3 years out of film school, but initially, it's always good to sort of get some advice. But that screenplay, get a good spec script. By all means, shoot a feature film. Sure, but not. The Reckoning Day was just an action sort of gung-ho action movie, and that nowadays, maybe 13, 14, 15 years ago, it sort of grabs people's attention, and people go, oh, there's some skill here. But it's 10 a penny nowadays,
And you don't think, though, doing Reckoning Day maybe it just only creaked a few doors open, but that didn't give you confidence to go and do Rolling with the Nines, which eventually led to,
I suppose,
your next...
You know what? Yes, I suppose it did, only in the very sort of strange ways. At Reckoning Day, I got a UK sales agent who then introduced me to a couple of producers that had also worked with him, and one of them had this story, or rather knew somebody else, and it was one of those, oh, he knows him, so yes, it does, it does open, a few doors, but again, this was sort of, this was a while back, now I would say, what I would really say is get that screenplay tighter, get that screenplay better.
Mm-hmm. Let's kind of just wrap up here and talk about what does sort of the future have for you, and maybe you can talk about even, as far out as 10 or 20 years. What are the kind of the goals that you have going forward?
I suppose my goal is really not to remain in one genre. I think it's unfair, especially in America, where filmmakers go to America and a lot of people like to be labeled, oh, you're the rom-com guy, he's the horror guy. That's the action adventure guy. That's the romance guy. That's the art. And that's not necessarily what I want to do. I definitely want to be able to jump between genres. I mean, look at Matthew Vaughn, for example. Stardust is a light fairy tale, if you like, a good fun fairy tale. He follows that up with Kick-Ass, which is possibly the most violent superhero movie. My personal favorite superhero movie. So in that, and then, so in that respect, weaving around, I would like to, I'm working on a science fiction project, and I'm also working on a project with the producer Lloyd Levin, who produced Hellboy, United 93, Green Zone. I'm working on a film at the moment with him, which is going to be shot out in China, which is set in the 15th century. It's not my screenplay. I also have another screenplay that I'm working with him on, which is a science fiction project, which is still not finished, and I think it's got a good 6 months of writing left on that. But there's some really exciting projects, as well as my Alps adventure and a film called 30 Feet of Dust, which is an American road movie. And movies set sort of all over the world, just things that interest me. I'm 39 now. I really want to explore, and I definitely, why would anyone want to stay, why would anyone want to stay in just one specific genre, all the time? It's nice to sort of, if you take every night of the week, you don't want to watch the same thing every night. Why do we have to sort of work on the same thing sort of every night,
Yeah, for sure. So, well, Julian, this has been a great interview. We've covered a lot of ground, gotten a lot of great information. I really appreciate it. What's the best way for people to keep up with what you're doing and follow you?
They could follow me on Twitter. I always keep people abreast on that, definitely. I guess Twitter, or when I have that's an interesting point I should say, is that actually the ABCs of Death 2, which has just come out, it's just premiered at Fantastic Fest and then at Strasbourg in France. Those are interesting projects because, going back to that short film thing, they're basically it's 26 directors and you're chosen and you're given a letter of the alphabet and you're basically given 3.5 minutes and a few grand and told, go off and make a short film. And it's an interesting, fun, but I mean, the original ABCs of Death had Adam Wingard, who's done the Guest and You're Next, and it had Ben Wheatley, who'd done Kill List, and Nacho Violando and Ty West and many others. And then the ABCs of Death 2 has got some really interesting directors, along with myself. So it's a fun, it's a real honor when you're asked by the sort of the festival directors of, South by Southwest, Fantastic Fest, Fantasia, all of these festivals. When you're asked to participate in one of these projects, it's really exciting.
Yeah, for sure. So I will link to your Twitter account in the show notes. So if anybody's looking for that, they can find it and click directly over there.
Absolutely.
Once again, Julian, this has been a great interview. Covered a lot of ground. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Really nice to chat to you. And thanks very much for having me on your show.
Oh, one last question,
yes,
Julian.
Of course.
Can you tell us when Plastic will be out? I always like to ask that in case people want to catch it. Maybe you know when it's going to be released.
In the States, it is out on tomorrow, I'm pretty sure. No, sorry, Friday. The 26th.
Yeah.
The 26th.
September 26th.
Yes.
It'll be okay, perfect. And is it going to be theatrical release or just video on demand?
No, it's a bit of both. It's out in limited theaters and also on VOD as far as I am aware.
Okay, perfect. So, well, once again, Julian, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to be running another online class called How to Make the Opening Pages of Your Screenplay Awesome. This is probably my favorite class to teach. I actually learn a lot by preparing for these classes and reading the various scripts we're going to cover in them. So hopefully you'll learn a lot too. It goes without saying how important the opening pages are for your screenplay. If your opening pages don't hook the reader, there's very little chance that the reader will continue to read the script. So it really doesn't matter how great the rest of it is if your opening pages are not great. I'm going to break down the opening pages for a bunch of great screenplays, including Legally Blonde, Shawshank Redemption, Natural Born Killers, and a few others as well. This is the third class in this series, which is going to guide you through the entire screenwriting process, from coming up with a marketable concept to outlining the screenplay to writing the script to actually taking it out and marketing it. If you missed the first two classes, no problem. I record them and have them in the SYS Select forum for you to listen to at your leisure. This class is going to be on Saturday, November 15th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. If you'd like to learn more about this class, go to www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/classes. Also, if you're listening to this after the class has taken place, that's not a problem either. I will record this class and put it in the SYS Select forum as well. In fact, all the classes that I've done and taught through SYS Select are recorded and are in the forum for members to listen to. At this point, we have more than a dozen classes covering the whole screenwriting process in there now. So to learn more about SYS Select, just go to www.sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. In the next episode of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast, I'm going to be interviewing Arnold Rudnick. Arnold is a television writer. Over the course of his career, he sold several TV spec scripts, and we talk about how he did it. So if you're interested in TV writing, you don't want to miss this episode. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. Just a quick couple of parting notes about the interview today with Julian. He's another writer-director who really got his start by just getting out there and making a low-budget feature film. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I really believe that the key to success in this industry is taking action. The first step is obviously writing a script, but then it's really about getting out there and getting your script made too, and not waiting around for a producer to decide if she wants to make it or not. As I said a couple of weeks ago, I'm really starting to see a pattern emerge here. It just seems like being a writer-director is a more complete package than just being a writer. So kind of take that under advisement as well. Also, his movie, he talks about it in the interview that he did a couple of years ago called A Lonely Place to Die. It's available right now on Netflix In Demand, so I would highly recommend you check it out if you have a moment. I just watched it a few days ago. It's a well-crafted thriller, and I highly recommend it. I think it's interesting, too, as I interview British filmmakers versus American filmmakers, the Brits seem to have a more artistic bent to them, whereas the American filmmakers, and I include myself in this, are much more practical and pragmatic, just trying to get stuff made, whether it has any artistic merit or not. I just kind of got the sense talking to Julian that he really did have kind of a artistic soul and was really looking to make something that, fulfilled that artistic sensibility that he has. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.